Thank you. You know it's a successful conference when people actually have a lot more interest in talking to each other than with the panelists. So thanks for enjoying the coffee break and exchanging conversations with each other. We're going to do something a little different right now, which is we wanted to have a bit of a conversation about what Cathy Blue has been up to and what the CDSN is up to, and then we're going to launch our podcast network here today. And that's what this session is all about, is presenting what we've been up to and what we're planning on doing in the future. And so Colonel Cathy Blue is a colonel in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Visiting Defense Fellow Program. Why are you hanging out with us shaggy academics?
Well, I wouldn't call you shaggy academics. You're all well dressed today. I think I've shocked a few people in the room because I appeared in my uniform, which is not normally how I roll over to Carleton any day. I am a colonel in the RCAF. My background, I'm a communications electronics engineer by background or by occupation. Spent well over 30 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, working both in the RCAF, supporting RCAF operations, but also kind of spread around a little bit doing putting ones and zeros all in the right places at the joint level, as well as working at our Canadian Forces College in Toronto, which provided me an opportunity to work with academics before, so it wasn't quite such a shock to arrive in an academic institution.
And what was your previous job before this one?
So my previous job before this one, I was the special advisor to Lieutenant General Carignan, who is Chief Professional Conduct and Culture at the Canadian Armed Forces, our newest L1 in the Canadian Armed Forces, charged with working on our conduct and culture.
So we can come back to that if we've got time. You're halfway through your time with us. What has been the biggest surprise in the program, either presented by the program itself or by the folks at Carleton?
Well, I think first off, I find that I might be a little older than most of the students sitting in the class. A little surprised by that. Not really. I have a 19-year-old at home, so that's okay. And I think for my last work in an actual academic institution, which would have been not at CFC in Toronto, but when I was studying for my undergrad, you couldn't smoke weed on the corner. That was behind the kitchen under the stairs. Not that I was there. But my biggest surprise so far, I think I would have to say the opportunity, the areas rather that the scholars are working in, the young master students that have the opportunity to meet, working in a vast array of areas within security, intelligence, and defense, and just where they are going and what they're doing with that's been my, been not a surprise, but maybe an enlightening moment.
Okay. And in terms of what are you doing this year as a Defense Fellow? So
as a visiting Defense Fellow, I'm working with NIPSI and CSIDS directly, following a number of courses, Dr. Saideman's course, of course. And on top of that, I do some work with the Canadian Forces College to stay attached to the National Security Program, which is another group of students. They're studying at the National Security Program. They are at my rank and developmental level in the Canadian Armed Forces, and following some of their program to maintain a network with them and to increase my education opportunities on what they are doing or information. On top of that, I'm working with Steve on civil-military relations, do quite a bit of chatting about that, and I've had the opportunity to sit in the first semester in 2 courses as a practitioner in the room. I'm not there as an academic, but I'm there as a practitioner.
And that's going to be particularly useful in my Civ-Mil class in the winter. You sat in my U.S. foreign policy class, where most of us are just sort of shaking our heads trying to figure out what's going to happen next. What has been the most useful contribution you think that you've had to the Canadian Defense and Security Network and to Carleton?
I think I was just wrapped up, of course, classes just wrapped up at Carleton, and they're going into their exam or a furious writing period, I would offer. And I think I noticed when I was in the room, I had the opportunity to provide, as I just said, the practitioner's layer. I could take the theory that we were talking about, the pieces that we were talking about, and add a Canadian Armed Forces or a defense lens to that, and what I would see as the practitioner of that. And I was reminded of that by a student actually just completed one of the courses was contemporary security, and the student came up to me after and he said it was wonderful, and I was a little buoyed because I wasn't sure if I was contributing anything, to have somebody in the room that could talk. You know, when we brought up a subject, I could layer just a little bit on to what defense would look at through that lens. So.
What are you looking forward to most in the rest of your time here?
Of course, the Civ-Military Relations class that I will do in the fall, or in the winter period. I'm continuing to engage with the students, having the opportunity to engage with the academics, and then having the chance to kind of work through my, I'm doing some research, of course, as part of my program that I have to deliver on, and I'm working on Civ-Military Relations and thinking about the role of an Inspector General. So I intend to be, hopefully, wrapping some of that research up.
Yes, that part of my role in all this is to work with her on the paper and provide some advice along the way. And the topic of Inspector Generals was very interesting to me because one of my research areas is oversight, and the question is, can you have too much or too little, and where does it come from? And so this is definitely, I'm looking forward to your work on this. So the last question I've got for you is, how will the experience of being a visiting defense fellow at NIPSIA influence what you do in your next job? Whenever I hang out with military officers, I always know there's a next job. They're always rotating pretty quickly from place to place to place. So.
Well, I think Lieutenant General Day, who reminded me to call him Mike, but I can't quite get there, he talked about that when he was on his panel. He talked about training and he talked about education. Well, this is my education, this is part of my education opportunity. And part of that is to have the opportunity to work with academia, to create a network with academia, and then bring that back. So bring that experience back to my role, whatever that next role might be, and I don't know that yet, hope soon. Whatever that next role might be, so that we can create that connection and that engagement between the academia community that is researching and working in the areas of defense, and then what we're doing within the department and within the Canadian Armed Forces in security and defense.
Okay. You got anything for me?
I got a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, Steve.
Sure.
So what is your biggest surprise about the Canadian Defense Security Network and what you've brought together there?
Well, we're halfway through the first grant that we received. So we've been doing this for basically 4 years now. And what is the biggest surprise along the way? This is a question I always ask other people. What was our biggest surprise? I guess for me, I still have a hard time dealing with the contrast between how small the defense and security community is and how big it is. And that we have so many different interests and bits of expertise around Canada. And there's such an eagerness for people to share their expertise, but we're often very disconnected. And so I think that was the aim of the CDSN, was to try to connect all these people with different perspectives and different backgrounds. And I just came back from Winnipeg. One of the things that was not surprising was it was cold in Winnipeg. I lost my mittens as I got out of the cab, so I was mittenless for my time there. But while I was there, I was talking to engineers about domestic emergency operations, because that has been one of the most active things that the CAF has been doing lately. And it reminded me when I first started researching the Canadian military, when I started looking into the Canadian effort in Afghanistan, there used to be an online website with all of the bios of all the colonels and above and all the Navy captains and above. It's now behind some sort of fence that we can't get anymore. But when you would go to that, you would find out that almost every senior military officer had, as one of the most salient experiences, was some emergency operation in Canada, and mostly the ice storm or the Winnipeg floods. And so it's interesting how it's come full circle on that. This is a topic that really is going to has been a source of a lot of attention in town the last few months. There were hearings about it, and so I think one of the things about that is there's people involved at all different levels. One of the presenters was the ADM for emergency management in Manitoba, and he happened to have been a student of mine 15 years ago, and I didn't remember him. 600-person class, so but it shows how connected we are all in Canada, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to take those connections and get the most out of them.
I think that kind of layers on to the opportunities for the Canadian Armed Forces to be engaged in a network where we can reach out and reach all of these different research areas, and our need to do that and be engaged in those networks. So that's a great segue. What have you learned from your visiting defense fellows? And I guess I should add, I'm the first full year visiting defense fellow. I have a counterpart that is at Queen's rather, and we're joined here by an American visiting defense fellow, Lieutenant Colonel Wendy Taka. I pronounced that wrong again. And the intent for the Canadian Armed Forces is for us to be able to have a visiting defense fellow network across a number of universities. So the expansion to here is great. What has your experience been?
Well, you're not the first military officer to hang out at NIPSIA. One of the first initiatives we had was to have people from CANSOFCOM. And so we've had 3 different officers from CANSOFCOM hang out with us, and then you. And it's, the diversity within the CAF in terms of backgrounds and attitudes, that the 4 officers that we've interacted with were all very different people, but they shared a deep curiosity that they constantly asking us questions about why we're doing the things that we're doing, constant confusion about, again, us wacky academics and the way we do things, but a real passion for the stuff. We're generally pushing them outside their comfort zone because they're doing research papers probably for the first time since undergrad, maybe since grad school, and they are facing the uncomfortable position of having no intent provided for them by their superiors. It's like, ask whatever question you want. And that the challenge has always been narrowing it down to the one thing. And so I think that's been really cool to see the curiosity that exists within these officers who get to hang out with us.
Well, that kind of segues into what has the Visiting Defense Fellow program brought to CSIDS and CDSN? What do they bring to your plate?
Well, they bring a whole lot. I mean, one of the things is we want to be able to communicate to the people in town. We want to be able to anticipate what are the concerns that they have. And so each of the past 4 year heads, we ask our defense fellow, what are the topics that are driving you? What are the things that you care about? And that informs our programming. So it's not just us trying to advance the latest in international relations theory. It's also us trying to develop programs and projects where we're trying to address policy relevant issues. One reason why I came to Carleton in the first place was to be able to communicate in the policy sphere. Our students are very much interested in that. Most of them go on to work in and around government. And so to be more conversant with the interests and the language. Like, I always enjoy talking to military people because I always talk about the X piece, the Y piece, the Z piece. It's always the word piece is being used. And so I'm getting a refresher course in military jargon and in habits, and that's useful because then I don't sound so strange when I'm talking to somebody in uniform.
Like mission command.
Well, I have I have an unresearched understanding of mission command, so it's nice to have Mike Day correct me in front of everybody else. I consider myself a lifetime student. I'm very, very curious, and so having people around with a very different background, it gives me a chance to ask lots of questions and learn more. And we try to get as much exposure to the students of our defense fellows, our master students mostly, our PhD students, and they get a lot out of it as well.
Awesome. Now, it's been quite a year so far. I think if you look back to 2022 and here to year ahead, and now we're at the 2023 year ahead, what are you looking forward to in the next year at CDSN?
Well, I'm looking forward to a variety of things. We have a regular calendar of events of 3 major activities. The first is I'm going to go backwards probably. Well, I don't know why Anessa's on the screen. Oh, there you go. The year ahead, which we're doing now, and we'll do again next December, is one of the most important things that we do. Try to bring together, both on the panel and in the audience, a mix of people from the policy world and from the academic world to try to highlight the concerns in the year ahead and have a conversation about them. So we had, in 2019, we had election security experts. Actually, I guess it was 2018 because of our election in 2019. We had election security experts. I'm assuming that we'll probably have something on trying to understand the American election in of next year. Well, no, it's 2 years away. Yeah, next year. Oh God, it's really close. In next December, we'll be trying to figure out what is the dynamics of the American election of 2024 that are going to affect us, potentially. So I'm looking forward to that event. What I'm really looking forward to is a capstone seminar. Every year we have our partners identify the best presentations in Canada from all their different events, and we bring them to one spot. The first year we did it at Canadian Forces College, literally the day before things shut down in Canada. And then the next year we did it in Ottawa at Carleton. And this upcoming year, in March, we're going to do it in Calgary. We're going to bring together, again, the sharpest presentations from our partners. Our friends at Calgary are going to host the event right before they have a major event of their own. And I always enjoy that event because we tend to skew young. We're trying to provide platforms that people don't usually have platforms. It's always been a diverse group of people from across the country, from different research projects, from different theoretical angles, methodologies, and all the rest. And so it's not the standard panel where you get 4 different people providing the same perspective towards a single topic. It's different things. But it leads to a conversation amongst the next generation, which is one of the purposes of the CDSN, is to help foster that next generation. So that's really cool. And we see these people coming back in our other activities. That some of them end up going on to be in our summer institute. Some of them have gone on to be on our podcast. And so that's always been terrific. So that's one of the things we're looking forward to. We have a summer institute in August. I'm using this as a chance to sell that to the audience. It's aimed at junior military career folks, emerging scholars, relatively junior policy officers, people from the private sector who want to learn more about defense and security, and also want to be able to meet the next generation, because the idea is not just to get the professional education about this stuff, but also to meet each other. And that's been very beneficial to us because, for instance, one of the people participating in that is now the editor for the Canadian Army Journal, which is not bad for us since we have lots of stuff we want to place in journals. We've had people who work in the Library of Parliament who've been great resources for us as we look to organize different events. And we also learn from them. It's not just, all of our stuff is not a one-way thing. We're constantly learning from other people, and so I'm really excited about that. We also have a batch of opportunities, so if you're a PhD student and you want to have a year hanging out with one of the research centers in the CDSN, the postdoc is a great opportunity. We've had 3 thus far. One is now Linna Tam-Seto, was our very first one. She spent her year at Queen's. You'll see her in a few minutes when we, are we bringing you up for, no, I don't know what we're doing. She's now a co-host of the podcast, the Battle Rhythm podcast, one of our 5 co-hosts of that podcast. And she was really a terrific addition to our team. We had Johanna Maas, who was so good at Queen's that they found another postdoc for her for her 2nd year, and she just had an event last week that really was terrific. And now we have Thomas Hughes, who's at Manitoba, and they've studied very different projects. And so we're welcoming any project in defense and security, broadly defined. Our definition of security has gotten broader and broader over the course of the 4 years that we've been in existence. So that's one of our opportunities. The second one is we have 2 of our undergraduate excellence scholars here today. We have Ahmad. Where are you, Ahmad? And we have Timnida. Where is she? Sitting at the same table. That's either good networking or bad networking. I can't figure out which. But the idea of the undergraduate excellence scholars is to take a couple of students from historically excluded communities and get them involved in our stuff, get them excited, get them involved in our events. Last year, our 2 scholars, we helped them apply for and get grants from the Department of National Defense to run events of their own. One ran a conference on rising China and declining United States and where does Canada fit in the Pacific. The other ran a hackathon, which proposed 3 different scenarios sort of hybrid kinds of situations. And the first day we were hosted by the Canadian Forces HQ at Carling. And the second day we were at Carleton, where they got to pitch their ideas. And we were judged by panels of various folks, including a number of D&D and CAF folks. We have a book workshop, so if you're finishing your book and you want to have somebody scrub it so that way it gets a better chance of being published and published in a good spot, we've had the first book came out by Stephanie Martel, just came out of Stanford University Press. The second book, Shannon Nash's project, is well underway to being submitted. And we have a third book workshop coming this spring. And finally, one of the things that we're trying to do now that's of broader interest, I hope, is with the various turbulence in Twitter, the question is, where can we have conversations that don't have a lot of advertising, which don't have a lot of extremists joining our conversations? And so we've long had a Slack, which is a intranet kind of Twitter. If you're not familiar with Slack, it's a good way to engage in conversations within a group. And so the group that we are is the CDSN. So if you want to join our Slack, we have channels dedicated to all the different research areas. So civil military relations, military personnel, Canadian operations, which is about NORAD and NATO, and security, which is, are we making people more or less secure? So those are the traditional CDSN research areas. We have the 4 new ones, so global health, supply chain vulnerability, domestic emergency operations, and climate security. Thank you. I always forget one of them. This time was the climate security one, which is funny because Anessa is leading that, and I was just staring at her face on the screens a minute ago. And what we're doing with the Slack is we can have conversations where we actually engage with each other about hot topics. So we've had, for instance, to use a recent example, we had a Canadian retired general speak at an event. It gained a lot of controversy because he was problematic on a variety of dimensions, and that led to a conversation about, do retired military officers, are they seen as speaking for the active military officers? Is this something that people believe in the United States? And now that conversation in the Slack has led to a potential research project on surveying the Canadian public. Do you think that a retired military officer saying problematic things, does that mean that the military believes problematic things, or is this seen as being just some random officer? So we're having conversations there that we probably could have had on Twitter months and years ago, but it's becoming increasingly harder. So that's an opportunity for anybody who's a member of the CDSN, and there's no charge to becoming a member of the CDSN until our grant runs out. And so if you want to join the conversation, just send Melissa Jennings an email. She invites you to the Slack. You become part of our conversation. And again, we have lots of topics in defense and security broadly defined. So that's something I'm really excited about. But the last thing I'm really excited about, and so I'm going to kick you off the panel, and I'm going to welcome the new members of the new Canadian podcast network. So can you folks come on up? And I'll get out of my seat and go to here and host a conversation. And thank you, Cathy.
Should we move our...
Well, you sit in proximity. There's like probably space for 2 seats in front of 2. And so what we're doing today is we started out 3.5 years ago. The Battle Rhythm podcast was the most visible manifestation of the CDSN because it took a long time for our research efforts and our conferences to be organized and us to get other things going. And so I really pushed Melissa and our previous co-host, Stephanie Malachy, to get started with our podcast because I thought it was a good way to establish the network as a thing and to get people excited about defense and security and try to communicate to broader audiences about the issues that face Canada and face the world. And we had conversations all over the place with all kinds of people. And as we went along, they developed a new network that was explicitly bilingual network, and they wanted to have a Francophone podcast. And so that's when Sarah-Myriam Martin-Brûlé came on board. She was originally with Thomas Junot, and now she has another partner, J.C. Boucher, who will be joining her for a while until our secret squirrel person gets permission to join us, and that person will eventually be a co-host as well. And so we had 2 podcasts, and we were working with a different podcast network, but we wanted to have more flexibility about broadening our network to include more voices, to include voices that maybe might be west of Ontario, because we were really doing a good job of representing Quebec and Ontario, not such a good job of representing the rest of Canada, and I understand that people in the west of Canada feel slightly alienated. So we are, as of today, we are now the CDSN Podcast Network. You can find us on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, and we'll try to endeavor to be on all the other podcast providers. Under the umbrella of the CDSN Podcast Network, you'll find Battle Rhythm, which again has been gone for 3.5 years. We now have 5 co-hosts: myself, Linna Tam-Seto, Artur Wilczynski, Anessa Kimball, who's online, and Erin Gibbs von Braunschott, who is not online today. So that is sort of the original podcast, but besides that, you'll also be finding, and I'm going to apologize for this, my education in French was in America, so in the United States, so that's why I can't speak French. Conseils, sécurité. And so that is our second podcast. Our third podcast is going to be Securityscape. And they've been going on for quite some time at Calgary, and now we're going to help them have more of a national profile. And our fourth podcast, which is going to happen in the spring, is the NATO Field School, and Field Report, I should say. And so what I want to do is ask them a few questions, find out more about them, so that way you know more about them, so that way you know what you're looking at when you look at Apple and see all the different episodes that will be listed under under the CDSN Podcast Network. And that's the symbol for the new podcast network, but anyway. So I mentioned this. This is the original Battle Rhythm. It was me. It's Anessa, who's online, and Arthur and Linna and Erin. We've interviewed people ranging from the CDS and the Minister of National Defense to Ali Wynn, who was one of our first capstone scholars, and Jacqueline O'Neill, who's the Ambassador for Women, Peace, and Security, and Lynn Golaker, who's a professor at Laurentian University, who has been a very visible voice both on Indigenous issues and also on LGBTQ2S+ issues. We had an excellent conversation about the purge, which was something I wasn't really aware of, and that was a moving conversation that we had, I want to say, 1.5 years ago. Now on to you, Sarah-Myriam. What have you been doing thus far, and what are you be doing in the future?
So we've did 34 episodes, Thomas Junot and I, for the past 2 years, and we've been connected. We've been doing really our homework for CDSN purposes and the Réseau d'analyse stratégique as well, connecting academics, practitioners, politicians, policymakers as well, trying to have a representativeness of not only professions, but also geographical, but also linguistic. So we were very proud to be the first Francophone podcast on security and defense issues in Canada. And we had guest highlights, of course, that are here that you can see from all the continents on all the topics in the Middle East and Africa, trying to have a variety of perspective, point of view, of expertise as well. And we were proud to have not only Francophones, but also guests that had French as their second language, but that wanted to be interviewed in French as well, Rosemary Barton being one of them, for example. So we will continue, Jean-Christophe Boucher and I, and following co-hosts as well, on this direction, trying to represent the Francophonie, but not only those born Francophone, but those who adopted the Francophonie as well, Francophile, and to maintain this variety of representativity, having the minister, for example, in Mali, before all the coups happened, but having this variety of perspectives as well, from ambassadors to UN practitioners as well, and discussing issues that are in the highlights, but also issues that are not only current or in the background, and trying to bridge all of those worlds together and amplifying voices.
Fantastic. And we also have the team from Calgary. I'll let you introduce yourselves and what you've been doing with Securityscape.
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Sarah Myers, and I'm a master's student in strategic studies at the University of Calgary. Myself, as well as Jordan Arnold and Davina Shanti, who are just right over there. Do you guys want to? Yes. Decided in our first year of our master's that we felt a gap in between what we were discussing within our program of security issues in Canada as well as internationally, between that and our ability to translate that to the public, but also within the security network in Canada. So we decided to create one, and luckily with the backing of Dr. Gibbs Van Brunschot and Dr. Hebert at the University of Calgary, we started it up. So you may notice if you get a chance to listen to our podcast, our first season has some bumps in the road, some growing pains.
Not the only one.
But it was something, it was quite a passion project for the three of us in particular, to get our voices out there and as graduate students to own the fact that we do have an impact and a voice in this particular field, and it's worth people listening to us about that. Listening to us as well as listening to us interview other experts, our fellows at CMSS, and external both, and allowing that student perspective to thrive. So that's what we did in the first year, and then my colleague Clarice here can introduce herself, and she represents kind of what we're doing moving forward.
Hi, I'm Clarice Forka. I'm also a student at the Center for Military Strategic Studies at the University of Calgary, and now I'm the current executive producer for Securityscape. It's an honor to follow the steps of my colleagues and developing this project. And our main goal right now is continuing the good work from the first season, and also to spread the debates of strategic studies to more people, to really translate all this, to translate strategic studies, defense and security, to turn into something more accessible to other people through the podcast, because we end up just talking to ourselves inside academia, and we see in the podcast an opportunity to spread this debate.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And our next podcast is Reports from the Field. And it's a project that's underway, but it's based on something that's been going on for quite some time. So can you explain this and introduce yourselves?
Sure. Can we hear me? Perfect. So my name is Hannah Christensen. I'm the program coordinator for something called the NATO Field School, which is run out of Simon Fraser University out in Vancouver. And I'm joined by my colleague Amy here, so we'll throw the microphone over to you in a moment. I'll start, I guess, by explaining the project we have so far, which is the NATO Field School. So what the NATO Field School aims to do is essentially bring talented young undergraduate and graduate students interested in security and defense directly to the experts in the field that they're interested in. So the main way we do this is through our NATO Field School program, which runs every summer, and we take students on an experiential learning experience through Latvia, Belgium, and Italy are our main locations. And what's really great about this is the students get an opportunity to hear the practitioner side of these topics that they've been interested in throughout their university experience and see what things look like in the field. So coming into the CDSN podcast network as sort of the baby here, what we were trying to think about is what new niche or what new perspective can we bring to the podcast network, which already covers the topics of security and defense so well. And the main value added that we can bring, of course, is our field experience. So in our field report, what I've sort of imagined this as is we have our news anchors, and then we have the reporters out in the storm, in the field, talking about what they're seeing on the ground. And that's what we're hoping to do with the NATO Field School team and the students that come join us every summer. So this is hopefully going to be a podcast that's partly student-led as well, and talking about the subjects that they're interested in, as well as bringing interviews and perspectives from the practitioners that we're speaking to out in our field experience. Amy, anything we can add to that?
Yeah, so my name is Amy Topshe, and I recently completed the field school this past summer as a student, and now I'm here working with Hannah and the field school director, Dr. Mowens. My role with the field school is an excellent example of another goal of the field school, which is to create opportunities for students to help them gain a broader network in security and defense and prepare them for future employment. And the reason why I'm saying this is because this is how our podcast will also fit into our field school. We want to give the students of the field school an opportunity to do something unique and cool. How many young people get to do podcasts? That's a really excellent thing to add to your CV. And also give the students a chance to share what they're learning as relatively young people in this field, sharing it to people who've been here for a long time and see what new perspectives they might bring.
Fantastic. And one of the things that your podcast will add is it's a different kind of podcast in that Battle Rhythm is every other week. When Conseils de Sécurité gets back in motion again, it'll be every other week. So 1 week in English, 1 week in French. And so there'll be one episode dropping pretty much every week on Wednesdays, as long as we don't exhaust Melissa and Karolov, who do all the heavy lifting of the editing of the podcast. And Securityscape is going to be when's your next season?
Well, we're doing the second season now, but we change it up each year because we want to give new students the opportunity to produce.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our first year, we did once a month, which was quite a thing to tackle as a master's student. And so currently, it's basically six for the year.
It's still one a month.
Oh, you guys are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every third Monday of the month.
Okay, so they'll be every third Monday of the month over the course of this winter and spring. And the NATO Field School will be episodic. That is, it'll be maybe leading up to the folks going in the field and then reports from the field. And then when they come back, there might be a few episodes about how that experience went. And then they'll go dormant for a while until the next rotation. And so what's great about that is it broadens our imagination of the possible. We don't have a very finite, limited idea of what new podcasts will do that qualify for joining the network. We're looking to add new podcast network. So if you have a podcast, if you have an idea for a podcast, you can approach us and we can consider it and see if it makes sense for us. What we want to do is go back to the mantra that Melissa put on our website, one of the first things we did, which is research, connect, amplify. We want to amplify the voices of folks in the defense and security community across Canada, and we want to connect them to others. So the idea of having these folks as part of the same network as us is hopefully there'll be spillover, and so people listen to the Battle Rhythm podcast will end up listening to Securityscape. People who are listening to NATO Field School will go, hey, this is really interesting, but do you have anything in French? And they'll go, oh, wait, we have a French podcast. And so we're hoping that together we can help each other connect to broader audiences. And what I want to do now is I want to ask each of you another question or two, but we'll start with Anessa since she's been very patiently online. Can you put Anessa on the screen? AV people who've been so wonderful though today. Anessa, how you doing?
I'm great.
Anessa Kimball is a professor at Laval University, a fully armed and operational professor at Laval University. And I want to ask you, you've been doing this for about almost a half a year now. What's been the sort of biggest surprise of podcasting?
I think the biggest surprise of podcasting is how much I hate listening to myself when I have to listen to it, and so that to make sure that it's okay. I think that that's probably the largest surprise for me. But actually, no, to be truthful, I think one of the things that's been most interesting for me is learning from you, Steve, in terms of setting up the podcast a little more for success. I kind of picked up a couple tricks from you, explain the little things, you know, kind of make it a little more public friendly. And I think the other thing is just how much fun I'm having.
Excellent. Sarah-Myriam, I'm going to ask you, as you're drinking, in the course of your, I guess, year and a half of doing podcasting, what has surprised you the most, impressed you the most?
One thing that surprised us the most was the listeners, the audience. Actually, we didn't know what to expect, but we were told that mostly it was civil servants trying to learn French were listening to us. It had the keyword, so that was a nice and good surprise. So there's that. That would be the major surprise of who's listening, who's on the other side. Well,
and that's the challenge of this thing, because most of the other things that we do, I can figure out who the people are in the room. They register for the event. A lot of the things we do, we know what's going on. But with podcasting, it's like radio in that you're sending stuff out there. You have no idea who's listening. And while more sophisticated enterprises have ways of tracking this information, we are not that sophisticated. Melissa's terrific, but we don't really have excellent data on who's listening. And so you find out by accident. You're at some event, you go, well, I was listening to your podcast the other day, and I was like, oh, you're listening to podcasts, that's great. And we were joking for the first year that we had 7 listeners. And it's very clear that we have more than 7 listeners. Not tens of thousands of listeners, not enough to advertise for some betting company or Audible or one of the other usual podcast advertisers. But we have a listenership, and it is a lot of people in and around government. And that's really impressed us. And one of my favorite moments in the podcast was I got a call from the aide to this chief of defense staff saying, Steve, you got something wrong. I'm like, how does the CDS know I got something wrong? And so that led to a half-hour conversation where he tried to correct what I believed. And actually, the thing was, he was informing me of changes that had happened that they hadn't advertised. So I was legitimately wrong, and it gave him the opportunity to say what they were doing differently. And then I could talk about that in the next podcast. And so we do have people who listen, or at least they tell us they do. And so that's been a surprise to us about where they're all from. So Sarah, in your time of podcasting, what's sort of been the biggest surprise that you faced?
So given that myself and then Davina and Jordan as well were kind of on the ground floor of this thing, trying to create something that hadn't existed, I think my personal biggest surprise was the willingness and excitement we got from experts and fellows of our program to actually come on to our podcast. I think as graduate students, there is this sense of we are to listen and learn, and not necessarily that we have a lot to provide to the conversation. And so it was very validating to have really an abundance of people who were excited and interested in speaking to us. And I do have to say I resonated with the joke of 7 people listened to the podcast, because that's definitely something that we joked about in our first season too, where we were thinking it was our mom and dad and aunts and uncles that were our tiny little people who were listening. But we, like even just being here and knowing that some people actually knew that we existed and being invited in general was not only, it was a very welcomed surprise, and it was also a very validating experience.
Great. Yeah, I was actually surprised that one of my sisters was a listener for quite a while, and she would comment and ask questions, and she had shown very little interest in defense and security up until that point in time. So it was very surprising. You don't have surprises yet. So what scares you the most?
I think one thing that we can say on the positive side, in terms of like the previous podcasts that have come before us, and how validating even the experience for us so far has been, is the support we're getting in starting up an idea that we came up with, right? And I think that's something that goes to show for how great the CDSN is at amplifying voices. Is we came up with this idea, and HQ, let's say, was very supportive of that. But not just that, it really showed me that CDSN is a network, because we have folks like Securityscape who are saying, hey, we've been in this position before in starting up that podcast, and we can give you some tips and tricks and help support you in creating this new idea. So I hope you know, there might be other people who are interested in starting something like this that'll see our progression and our journey into it, and how much support we're getting, and feel confident in maybe pitching something themselves. We were told that, you know, you've made it when you have your first Twitter hater, so we'll get there one day. But yeah, so I suppose we haven't hit the surprises or yet, but yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to, and we're really comforted, I suppose, so far by the support we've gotten from CDSN and the network that we're a part of now.
Oh, great, I'm glad to hear that. Are there any questions from the audience about what they intend to do in the future, or suggestions for what we should be doing in the future? Or what we should regret from our past? I guess not. Okay, so I want to thank you all. I'm looking forward to our future of podcasting together. I especially want to thank Melissa, who does almost all the production on this stuff, and Carla Dorius, who does the rest of the production on this stuff, and Rachel Wallace, who's done a lot of the research that we use every week to figure out what we're going to talk about every couple of weeks. We've had a great team working on this stuff. Challenged by the pandemic, we've adjusted and adapted, and we really owe a great deal of thanks to the people who are willing to talk to us. It turns out people like to talk about themselves, so it's not that hard of an ask. But we still have gotten a great diversity of people on our collective podcast to talk to us, and that what makes this interesting. I get to ask all kinds of pesky questions of people and engage my curiosity, which is why I got in this business in the first place. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank Carla for designing the new logo, which has the little network symbol at the top of our old logo. She was really intent on giving us some really good models to build from, and all of our graphic design has gotten really good when we hired Carla 6 months ago. That's not to insult my graphic design or Melissa's, but Carla has a real good sense of the visual, and that's really helped us in a lot of our promotional stuff. Rachel has also been terrific in that. The pamphlets we have this year for the program are better than the previous years. Everything's looking better each year, and it's due to the hard work that these people put in. Now I'm standing between you and, well, lunch isn't completely delivered yet, but a chance for you to take a break and then and hang out and chat with each other. So we're gonna have a lunch break, and then we're gonna have the panel on civil military relations, and then we'll have the final panel delivered by the people from Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security Canada, although maybe your name has changed since I've seen it differently, so we can talk about that. I think there's a longer version of it. Anyway, enjoy the lunch. Thank you again to you guys for everything that you do to make us look good and sound good.